The MCAT Cars Podcast, session number 7. The Cars section of the MCAT gives thousands of pre-meds nightmares every night. Whether you're an ESL student, lack confidence while reading, or are a slow reader like me, Jack Westin and the medical school headquarters are here to help you score higher in every section so you can be confident you're ready to get the MCAT score of your dreams. Welcome to the MCAT Cars Podcast. If this is your first time here, I want to thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to check out what we are all about, where we are here to really help you understand how to break down the passages in the car section and every section of the MCAT. I do that every week with my buddy Jack Westin, who is the expert online MCAT Cars tutor. You can find everything he does at jackwestin.com. This week, we're breaking down a New York Times article about music and reporting. All right, Jack, back with some more MCAT Cars podcasts. I'm excited to be here. Hopefully, the passage that you picked out for us today isn't as bad, as hard as last week was. I don't want to use bad because we learned a lot last week, but it was really hard.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of students will see a passage they don't like and go, oh, this is too hard, this is bad, right? Hard is not bad, right? Sometimes it's okay and you'll learn a lot from it. You gotta really be open to making mistakes. And if you're okay with making mistakes, you will get stronger and better at this. And yeah, today's passage is a lot easier. It's one of the easier ones. It's enjoyable to read, which we'll talk about in a second, why it's enjoyable. And yeah, it's going to be a total 180 from last week's passage.
For somebody who is listening to these episodes week after week, but wants to continue to try to do and utilize the skills that we're teaching every day and go and find articles, what's the best way that you'd recommend somebody go find articles that they can break down like we are?
Use the daily passages that I have. That's literally at the level of the MCAT. At least we try to make it at the level of the MCAT, and there's always a new one every day. And they come with questions, so I think that's the best resource. You can also use any other prep book. Any other third-party prep book is fine for reading, right? Reading stuff is different from answering questions, so if you're just wanting to get better at reading, I do recommend just any CARS passages from anywhere. But if you want to do questions that I think mimic the real test without actually doing real test content, like a lot of students save the real test content for later, check out our daily passages.
And if you want to get those passages, just text the word MCAT Cars. I know most of you are driving or working out, whatever. So just text the word MCAT Cars to 44222, and we'll send you a link to actually sign up for that. Quick and easy. All right, Jack, what do we have in store today?
Okay, so this passage is interesting, right? And literally, it's interesting. It's something that a lot of students will understand because they find interest in it. It's a topic that they are, it's relatable to them, so it won't be as hard to read. Now, the arguments of the passage may be a little bit on the harder side, but because the topic is so interesting, it's going to feel very easy, right? These are the kinds of passages that students will read and feel, wow, I got it. I really get it. I understand it. But that's probably not always the case. They feel that way because they like the topic. But if you're not really paying attention, you could easily make just as many mistakes on this easier passage as a harder one. So, I always talk to students who may have retaken the test and they think, oh, the first time they took it, they thought, oh, wow, it was such an easy test. I thought it was so easy. And that's not necessarily true, because even though you may find the topics to be interesting and you may follow along, if you're not really paying attention to what the author is saying and you're focused more on the key words, which we'll look at soon, you may miss the questions just as often as those harder passages, maybe even more, right? And usually the easier passages are less forgiving. So if you make more mistakes on those, or you make as many mistakes on that as a harder passage, you may get a lower score, because in general, the easier the passage, the less likely they are to curve it or scale it to other passages that may be harder.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so let's jump in here. And again, if you want to follow along with our article today, go to MCATcarspodcast.com and find the blog post for this episode. All glossy magazine superstar covers may look the same from a distance, but inside, you're never quite sure what you'll find. Right away, I'm like, am I reading a Cars passage here? Or am I reading something that I should break down here? So it's all glossy magazine superstar covers may look the same. So it's basically telling me don't judge a book by its cover, right? So that's cliche.
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Take the October issue of GQ, which features Paul McCartney. And so now they're giving a specific example. October issue of GQ and Paul McCartney. For decades, he has leaned on familiar Beatles anecdotes, presuming that decades-old chestnuts may still pass for warm. Interesting. So the end of the sentence, decades-old chestnuts may still pass for warm. I don't know what it's trying to tell me there. But all I know from the sentence is that it's saying that Paul McCartney has leaned on or used familiar Beatles anecdotes.
That's it, right? I mean, the still pass for warm, it's probably like a figure of speech, right? They're trying to say, look, it's still relevant. It's still something that's being used. But again, it's not that important. As long as you realize that, we're familiar with the Beatles, they're popular, etc., I think you're fine.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what my MCAT taking self would do in this situation, or previously to being educated by Jack Westin, is I would start reading this and going, oh, so Paul McCartney used to tell all of these Beatles anecdotes thinking that people still like them, but now he doesn't do that anymore. I would read into that one sentence all of that.
Right. And it's not necessary, and I kind of go against that. I think you shouldn't do that.
Yeah,
right?
No, I don't want to do that, but that's what I would do, and a mistake that I think many others will make that they shouldn't.
Right.
Okay, but in GQ, over the course of several long conversations, he revealed himself to be unstudied, slightly wishy-washy, and much less preoccupied with the sanctity of his own image than you might think. He even offered a recollection about the Beatles' teenage sexual adventures that led to a characteristically sweaty New York Post headline, "Beat the Meatles." Beat the Meatles. Okay. So the author here is not really painting the best picture of Paul McCartney, saying he's unstudied, slightly wishy-washy, and that he that he's not worried about painting this picture-perfect image of himself.
That's it. Yeah, he seems to be revealing his true self, right? That's kind of what the author really wants you to realize, is that as the conversation is occurring, he's revealing more about himself and like his life, right? And maybe some of his work, right? Okay.
The story worked in two ways. For the reader and fan, it was appealingly revealing. For Mr. McCartney, who's been famous so long, he is more sculpture than human. It was a welcome softening. And so again, it's the author is saying that because Paul McCartney's opening up, the fans like it because they get to see a little bit more, and other people can see that Paul McCartney is an actual human.
Yeah, true self.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it says welcome softening. So is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It says welcome softening, so I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's it. So maybe opening up about yourself, seeing, a different angle to these celebrities or this celebrity is good. Is a good thing. Okay.
All right. I like these paragraphs. They're super short. It's like one sentence. Paragraph 4. This took a willingness to answer questions, to submit to the give and take that comes with a profile of that scale. So the author is saying it took the willingness, some guts to answer the questions that openly.
Yeah, that's it.
But not all big stories demand such transparency of their subjects. Say the September issue of Vogue with Beyonce on the cover. So the author is now giving the other side that you don't always have to be that transparent. And giving a specific example.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. The accompanying article is titled Beyonce in Her Own Words. Not a profile, but a collection of brief, only occasionally revealing commentaries on a range of topics. Motherhood and family, body acceptance, and touring. So they're just describing the article. So in the previous sentence, they gave the example, September issue of Vogue with Beyonce, and then they're giving what that September article actually was, and it was a collection of commentaries.
Was it revealing or not revealing?
Only occasionally revealing, so not very revealing. So not very open, not revealing true self like previously they were talking about with McCartney.
Good. See, this is the hard part. When people read about Beyonce, they're like, "Oh, I love Beyonce," but they don't realize that the author is expressing something, right?
Yeah.
The author is expressing that Beyonce wasn't so revealing, right? Whereas Paul McCartney was.
Yeah, so it was negative.
It could be a negative. I mean, it hasn't necessarily said it's negative, but we can assume most likely it's negative simply because the welcome softening, right, was portrayed in a positive light. So yes.
Okay. Anna Wintour refers to the story in her editor's letter as a powerful essay, quote, powerful essay that Beyonce herself writes, as if that were an asset, not a liability. Interesting. The asset, not a liability, I'm not quite sure where it's going with that, but we're given the Anna Wintour a new name here, that apparently she's the editor, so it's just the editor's letter. And she's saying that Beyonce wrote the essay herself, and maybe there's an issue with that. The asset, not a liability. I'm not quite sure what that means.
So Beyonce wrote it herself, right? I mean, we've all seen this before, right? Like in her own words, right? Like that's how they like to promote these things, as if it were an asset, right? Mm-hmm. Not a liability. So maybe it is a liability. Maybe it's bad that this celebrity is writing in their own words.
Mm.
Okay? We don't know 100%, but that's where it's leaning, I guess. Go ahead.
There was a journalist in the room at some point in the process. The piece has an, quote, as told to credit at the end, but outside perspectives have effectively been erased. So they're saying, well, maybe she didn't really write it herself. There was a journalist in the room, and but those perspectives have been erased, and it's supposedly written in Beyonce's words.
Right. So what is the big takeaway here? What should you know after finishing this paragraph?
Really, the most important thing I think to me was the going back to the second sentence where it was this profile, not a profile, collection of brief, only occasionally revealing commentary. So this article of Beyonce just wasn't very revealing.
That's it. So this is not a very revealing article, even though it may be as told to, right, or in the credits. It's not really another perspective. It's really just her perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
For devotees of Beyonce, this might not matter, though it should. So the author is saying that, like, these hardcore fans of Beyonce aren't going to care. They'll read anything that Beyonce has written, but maybe they should care that it's really not very revealing, or maybe not her words.
Okay.
But for devotees of celebrity journalism, this kind of work that aims to add context and depth to the fame economy, and which is predicated on the productive frisson between an interviewer and interviewee, this portends catastrophe. So here we get a negative light on this article, Beyonce's article, that for celebrity journalism, for those who like journalism, that this is not a good thing. It's a catastrophe.
That's it. This is a very clear opinion that the author is giving us, right? That it's bad.
Yep.
It's negative. It's a devastation, right? So yeah, good. Okay.
And so as I'm reading this, going back to kind of how to work through a passage with the screen in front of us and mouse in our hand, should we be highlighting that sentence, highlighting portends catastrophe, underlining? What should we be doing there?
Underlining, highlighting is not important.
Okay.
I think it distracts you. What's more, I think a lot of students think, oh, if I highlight it, I'll understand it. That's not true. Just because you highlight something doesn't mean you understand it. You just have to understand it, right? Highlighting will help you remember where it appeared, right? And that might, I don't know if someone who's been highlighting all your life, go ahead and highlight, if that makes you, comfortable. But don't mistake highlighting for understanding. Okay, highlighting is not understanding. And if you just understood this, you don't have to highlight it. You don't have to worry about highlighting at all. You just have to understand it.
And it's not an isolated event. So a very short sentence, and the author is saying that this one article is just an example. It's not alone. There are others. In pop music especially, plenty of the most famous performers essentially excuse the press. Taylor Swift hasn't given a substantive interview and access to a print publication for at least 2 years. So they're bringing in another name here, Taylor Swift, probably a name that most people will read and know who they're talking about. And the author is saying that Taylor Swift hasn't really revealed herself either.
You might not know what askew means.
Yeah.
But what does it kind of sound like based on everything you're reading?
They're avoiding the press?
That's it. So you don't need to have a really strong vocab here. As long as you know what's going on, right? Like you'll know,
context.
Okay, the context. Okay, well maybe Taylor Swift is doing the same thing Beyonce is doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
For Drake, it's been about a year, and a tumultuous one at that. So again, another name, another example of the author saying there are other celebrities out there not talking to the press. Frank Ocean has all but disappeared again. And so again, just one more example. And so kind of the breakdown of this paragraph is that fans really like any sort of article on their star of choice, but all of these stars are kind of avoiding the press, and that's kind of a bad thing.
Yeah, great.
What's replaced it isn't satisfying. Either outright silence or, more often, unidirectional narratives offered through social media. So the author is saying that because stars aren't talking to the press, there are these other things, either nothing is coming out or we have just social media stuff that's being pushed out. And it's unidirectional, meaning it's only one person's voice.
Right. And that's important to know because the author is now not just describing it as just not having a conversation, but it's just unidirectional. So unidirectional is another way of being less revealing, right? So in a way, the author is trying to say that if it's unidirectional, if it's only one person's perspective, it's not revealing. That's an assumption the author is trying to make for us, right? That in order to have a revealing conversation, we need to have a bidirectional or a conversation between, like an interview, like an actual interview. So that's something to keep in mind as you're reading. That's something that's good to visualize and understand. That's something they could ask questions about.
Monologue, not dialogue. So that the next sentence there is just talking more about that unidirectional.
Right.
It's a monologue, not a dialogue. It threatens to upend the role of the celebrity press. And so they're saying that because stars aren't talking to the press and everything is coming out as a monologue, that it's not good for the celebrity press. Right.
Now, a good question the MCAT will ask is, which of the following would the author not like or not prefer in today's literature or today's news or or like articles or publications. And they'll give you 3 answers that have something to do with conversations, right? Like a teacher speaking to a student, or another one might be a pet owner speaking to their doctor, right? And then another one maybe where it's just the president of the United States speaking to the camera, right? And another one where, again, you have this conversation between 2 people. So maybe a student and their proctor, right? Or maybe a referee and the athlete, right? So all three of them, A, B, and D, will have some kind of bidirectional aspect to it where you have a conversation between the two. Mm-hmm. Whereas one of them, the president speaking to the camera, is more of a monologue, and the answer will be that the author would prefer not to have a president speaking to the camera, right? So that's something to take away, is they can add analogy questions, and you got to know that bigger picture in order to answer those questions.
Okay. So, big takeaway from this passage. We start off with Paul McCartney kind of becoming more transparent in his interviews, and then breaking down how there are other stars out there who aren't becoming more transparent or are actually avoiding the press, and how that's bad. That's it.
So avoiding the press or not having real conversations or interviews where it's bidirectional is bad, right? It's less revealing for literature. It's bad. Just because it's interesting, just because we're talking about Beyonce and Drake and Taylor Swift, right, doesn't make it easy. Doesn't mean that you're going to have an easy time with it, right? You got to still understand that bigger picture. And sometimes having that kind of topic may actually distract you from your goals. Usually they're not going to put in articles that are relevant to you. They're going to have more like boring, mundane passages. But this does fall under pop culture, which is one of the topics that they could present in cars. And usually when they say pop culture, it refers to like a lot older, like older times, not like 2000s, but maybe like in the 1800s or 1900s, right? So they'll talk about the pop culture of, I don't know, like someone really famous back in the 20s, right, or 30s, which you probably have no idea about, right? And that makes it mundane. That makes it boring.
All right, there you have it. This was a fun one because it was like, I would love to talk about Beyonce and Paul McCartney and everybody else. So I think this one was a little bit easier to dive into the material because it's less intimidating. And I don't know about you, but when I start reading these passages, if there are words that I don't know, if there are lots of really big words, I start to get intimidated. And that's where, looking at a passage like this, I felt a lot more comfortable because I'm like, oh, I know Vogue, I know Beyonce, I know Paul McCartney, and it's just more fun and less intimidating. And with Jack Westin's help, he's helping, hopefully, what we're doing here is helping you become less intimidated, even with those passages that seem more intimidating right off the bat, where you don't understand potentially what the subject is. Going back to an earlier episode about quantum mechanics and quantum computing, right? That one was like, whoa, like, okay, I like science and computers and stuff, but quantum computers, I don't know anything about. And it's intimidating. And what we're doing here and what Jack Westin's mission is helping to make all of this less intimidating for you so that you have a system in place where you can go in and break down these passages, break down these sentences, break down these paragraphs to help you become more confident and increase your CAR score and increase your overall MCAT score. If you are interested in learning more about how Jack Westin can help you on the CARS section, go to medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin and check out his MCAT CARS strategy course. It's over 70 hours of instruction with personalized attention where you can gain confidence and master the critical skills needed to do well, not just on the CARS section, but the MCAT as a whole. You can save $100 by going to that link, medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin, or text the word CARS coupon to 44222. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time here on the MCAT Cars podcast. When you use the links provided in this podcast, you're helping to support MedEd Media and the podcasts that we produce. Not only do you get a discount, but we earn a small commission as well. Thank you for your support. In pop music especially, plenty of the most famous performers essentially eschews.
Yeah, so eschew, yeah.